all so much for being here. And a very big special thanks to the Campus Feminist Alliance for inviting me to be the keynote. I'm honored. They asked me to give an inspirational address, which is sort of a tall order given what we're talking about. But after hearing so many stories of so many survivors and just witnessing the courage and the strength and the vulnerability in the room, I really feel like inspiring is the least I can try to do. So thank you again all for just being here for one another. I'm honored to be here with you and so happy that we can all be in this space together. So in case you didn't know, Take Back the Night originated in the 70s as a response to real events of women who were being attacked in the night. In more recent decades, though, we know that the discourse around rape has shifted because now we know that rapes are far less likely to happen by strangers in the dark of a public space. Instead, close to 80% of survivors are assaulted by someone that they know or trust, like a family member, a partner, a friend, an acquaintance. And that is unless we're talking about the cases that come through the Women and Gender Advocacy Center at CSU, in which case 98% of survivors are assaulted by someone that they know or trust. So yeah, stranger rape is a real thing, and so is rape by those who we encounter the most, the very people who we expect to not rape us, who we assume we can trust. And while Take Back the Night maintains an emphasis on raising awareness of rape and sexual violence towards women over the past 40 years, it has evolved to serve a larger purpose of raising awareness to prevent future violence in various forms for multiple populations. So not just rape, but domestic violence, child sexual abuse, and then broader forms of interpersonal violence like harassment and stalking. And as we have heard, all of these forms of violence can be targeted at girls and boys, women and men, and as we've heard, especially lately in the headlines of our country, there are especially vulnerable populations of our loved ones and community members who identify as being transgender. So that completely uninspiring list of different kinds of violences may strike your ear as an oversized can of like really slimy and ugly worms that are hard to look at, let alone even get close to touching. But I think that our purpose for being here at Take Back the Night is actually really quite simple. We are here because we want everyone to be free from violence, and we believe that everyone has the right to move freely through everyday spaces with others, day or night, in the streets of Fort Collins, at school, at home, in public restrooms, without fear or threat of violence in any form. So we're not here simply to raise awareness of the fact that sexual violence is a reality. Given that 1 in 4 women, 1 in 6 men, and 1 in 2 trans individuals experience sexual violence in their lifetime, this is a reality that far too many of us are already very painfully aware of. So instead of merely pointing out a reality, I think we are speaking out and gathering here tonight to try to challenge and change a culture where violence is an everyday occurrence. And so by shifting a singular focus away from the sheer realities of rape, my hope is that we'll more clearly see opportunities to affect real and profound cultural change. Our culture, which fosters and perpetuates interpersonal violence, is a rape-supportive culture for sure. In that case, one of the most important things we can do to better support survivors is to listen to them, to believe and honor their stories. And one of the most important things we can do to stop potential perpetrators is just to teach them to not rape. One of the most important things that we can all do to change and challenge a rape-supportive culture is intervene in problematic situations as bystanders. In other words, it's on us, everyone, to stand up and speak out before acts are committed that subsequently make someone a perpetrator and another person a survivor. So this is prevention through intervention. I'm talking about bystanders who don't just stand by and witness from a distance, but bystanders who are willing to step in, get involved, and defend others so that they are not even confronted with that violence. And I'm talking about intervening so that a situation doesn't play out to become yet another story about harm and sexual violence. So while I just said that it's crucial and important to listen to the stories of survivors, let's get one thing really clear. Our goal here is for there to be no more rape stories to tell. And also, just to be extra clear, I'm not even really talking about the bystanders who swoop in like Captain America to intervene when an assault is occurring, though if you ever find yourself in that situation, please do intervene. We know that most sexual assaults don't happen in public spaces, so we're rarely going to be direct witnesses of those actions. But truth be told, it was just 2 months ago in my own neighborhood, walking down the street, that I walked by a sexual assault happening in a car and had to call the police. So, although that might be somewhat of an anomaly, what does happen in public everyday spaces, like streets or shops or offices or gyms, buses, sidewalks, schools, these are the very sort of interactions that perpetuate and reflect a rape-supportive culture. And such interactions provide opportunities for us to intervene so that the result is not another rape story. And with that in mind, I've decided against sharing my own rape story. On one hand, I recognize that several things could happen if I were to go into detail about my own experience of rape. For instance, some of you might suddenly view me as a more credible speaker, but I don't want to reinforce the notion or the assumption that one has to have been raped in order to be able to speak out against it. And nor do I want to use that experience as the only basis for a connection with those of you who are also survivors, or risk alienating some of you who are here who are not. Rather than bonding in light of a shared victimization and pain, I think we're better to bond and rally together out of a shared commitment to end sexual violence by actively changing a rape-supportive culture. So on the other hand, sharing my story would put yet another face and another name to the statistics of the 1 in 4 women who experience sexual violence. I know from my own experience that when I share the story of when I was raped, it often does something to people's perceptions. Some people say, oh, wow, I can't believe that you're someone who's gone through something like that. And so, like, just strictly statistically speaking, that's kind of a dumb thing to say. What's there to not believe? It's 1 in 4. So the 1 in 4 of us aren't just hiding in distant shadows of mythical spaces. No, instead, we are all, always, already surrounded by people who have gone through something like that. I think, though, that the really problematic thing about this perceptual shift that happens when I tell my story, it's clearly evidenced when I also talk about the sort of violence I endured for over 1.5 years in an abusive relationship. Beyond, I can't believe you're someone who has gone through something like that, many people have responded with a deep disbelief, and I mean that, to hear it, disbelief. They say, I can't believe someone as strong, intelligent, educated, and well-spoken, and confident as you would ever put up with that sort of treatment from anyone. And buried somewhere in that response, I hear the implication that I must not be as strong, intelligent, educated, well-spoken, or confident as they previously presumed, so I correct them. I'm not weak. That's just how real and awful the violence inherent to abusive situations can be. So no matter how strong you are, it's the very nature of abuse to keep you in it. Now I realize that the implication that only the weaker among us could possibly get caught up in an abusive situation is very different from being called a slut, and no one's accusing me of being intoxicated for 1.5 years, or that I was asking for it, or that I deserved it. But I bring up this other example for a very important reason. If any of you, or the people who I'm talking to, who I know have done this, felt something shift in their perception of me with the sheer mention that yes, I too have my own stories of rape and domestic violence, if that shift is experienced as something like surprise or skepticism or disbelief, notice that. And hopefully you or they will also see how that response is connected to a deeply twisted form of victim blaming. So if you didn't realize that before, but now you do, good. Let's call that a win for the night. So although I am not going to tell you my own rape story, I will share how it typically goes when I do. I tell a larger story that goes something like this. I was raped one night when I was 17. I was a senior in high school. But now that I've told you that, I worry it will become the pinnacle of what you think you know about my experience of sexual violence, of what I know what sexual violence is and looks like. I know that what happened to me is messed up, and I assume that you agree, because naming a rape gives it a weight and a significance that solicits a unique kind of attention and sympathy from the people who hear it. But while you're now fixated on that one night when I was 17, on that one time when I was raped, I also know that that was just one terrible night of my life. So some of you know me, others of you don't, but you can probably tell that I don't really consider myself to be a very quiet or passive or timid person, even less so as I've gotten older and found my own voice. But for many years before that one night, through middle school and high school, and for many years after it, through college to this month, I have had so many experiences of being inappropriately touched, groped, spanked, grabbed, kissed, harassed, catcalled, coerced, cornered, pursued, pressured, propositioned, encroached upon, stared at, and followed that I literally cannot count them. In terms of those categories, that's a long list of unwanted, problematic, harmful, inappropriate, defensive, offensive, and highly uncomfortable interactions. So in case anyone was suddenly overcome by yet another wave of skepticism or disbelief by that long list of categories alone, I could go on for a few more hours tonight, I won't, and describe multiple examples of each of them to assure you that I do have real stories. And I'm sure that if I were to share the mic with others here, I bet we could have a marathon retelling for I don't even know how long we'd be here. However, for me, what's even more disturbing than the fact that I have too many examples of these disrespectful, fear-inducing, violating, and generally unwanted interactions for me to count is the fact that I also know that there are even more of them that I don't remember. See, it's easy for me to remember my rape, and it's easy for you to remember my rape too, because we hear rape, and people think they know what that means. Rape is understood as a more clearly defined and identifiable violation, even though we've heard and we know that that's not necessarily the experience of it. But it's hard for me to remember every single thing that has happened over my life that reflects the rape supportive culture. The times when I have not felt safe to walk through everyday spaces without fear or threat of violence, without fear or threat of people viewing me as merely an object passing through their space for them to treat as they want or wish. So please don't let the fact that I know I can't remember every instance like this discredit me or anyone else who can relate when we say that we live in a rape supportive culture and scene and storytelling. So now, these sorts of things, many of you probably can sympathize, are so everyday, so commonplace, that it's like asking someone to remember the specific outfit that they wore on any given day as proof of their experience of wearing clothes. I remember many outfits I've worn throughout my life, but not all of them. And if I did, there'd hardly be any room in my brain for anything else. But the fact that I don't remember every single uncomfortable, threatening, or inappropriately sexually inflected thing that has happened to me does not mean I haven't been wearing clothes every single day of my life. It doesn't mean that I, like the rest of you, don't have to live in and confront a rape culture every single day. We know that we do. Forgetting some of these particular instances might be necessary for our own survival and well-being. So while that may mean that we can't remember all the stories in order to retell them as if we would even want to, it also means that our perceptions have necessarily become so heightened that we no longer have to understand rape supportive culture by categories, lists, or singularly powerful words like rape alone. When you have that much experience, you can forget the specifics because you develop a knowing sense, and that functions more like instinct. Like muscle memory in your fingers when you're playing piano, or throughout your hips and legs and arms when you're going to strike for a goal, we develop skills of knowing our surroundings and how to move through them that are not natural, yet they can feel like second nature. Like reflexes, they become habituated and practically unconscious. So similar to how one learns how to gracefully drag a paintbrush over a canvas, it's the 10,000 hours of experience that makes us expert. You've seen it play out so many times before that you can identify subtle patterns. And it's not the same as predicting the future or knowing exactly what is going to happen. It's about having enough experiences by being in enough similar situations to be able to make a pretty solid guess. This is how one develops that heightened sense of perception, intuition, gut feelings. You do it so much that you don't even have to know that you're doing it to do it well. In a rape supportive culture, this means that although I can't count or recall all of the problematic things that I've encountered in everyday spaces that were different from that one time when I was raped, I can tell you that I walk into a space and instinctively, nearly unconsciously, register who else is around, who makes eye contact, who seems shifty. I notice the men stopped next to me at a red light staring at me without even looking back at them. I sense the weird vibe some guy puts off when he walked into the cafe well before he moved to a chair next to me so that he could simultaneously peer at me and the porn he was watching on his phone screen. I wasn't surprised when the teenage kid in a parking lot turned out to say hi, not just to be nice as I walked to my car, but instead to ask me to jerk him off behind a dumpster. So for anyone who thinks that in order to end rape we need to teach women to be more aware of their surroundings, they clearly don't understand that our daily experiences have already forced us to be hyper-aware. So much so that we've had to become expert navigators of these everyday spaces as a fundamental mode of and for our daily existence. So let's circle back to where I started. Rather than acquiring more defensive, protective skills of our own, we need everyone, all of us, to become expert in prevention and intervention to challenge our rape supportive culture so that we don't have any more rape stories to tell. If you're privileged enough to have missed the 10,000 hours of direct experience and therefore feel like you lack a sense of how and where problematic everyday experiences would play out, here's my recommendation. Start asking about and listening to all of the countless, seemingly less weighty, not rape stories people can share so that you become more aware of what's going on. And then you can use that heightened sense of awareness to better stand up for others. The opportunities to do so are always already around you. It's also true that there are too many of those opportunities for intervention to count, perhaps even too many opportunities to recall or remember. But we need to learn how to identify them. So I'll offer a narrow slice of just 3 examples, and how narrow, like really, really narrow. 3 examples from my own life, from within the past year, in Fort Collins, Colorado, Old Town Square. Narrow. Example 1. I'm at a bar with several others excited to dance and have a good time, and my friends know that I have a no-touch policy when I go dancing, but some very drunk guy apparently didn't. He grabbed my hands and tried to do the spin move, which is a real no-no for me. I took my hands back and told him I didn't want to dance. With his second and third attempt to grab me again, I told him no some more, then smoothly spun his body and gently but swiftly pushed him away from me. Seeing that I had to actually move this guy's body
His more sober friends then came over to me to apologize and assured me that he's just super drunk. They said, "Don't worry, he's harmless. He hardly even knows where he is right now." To which I replied, "Don't apologize to me for your friend. If he's so drunk that he can't respect me or my personal space, you need to take him home and get him out of this place." Example number 2. I'm standing on the sidewalk of Long Mountain Avenue with a couple of guys that I formerly knew. The oldest of whom is a crass kind of guy in his mid to late 50s who thought it fine and maybe even a little funny to address 3 young women, maybe in their early 20s, as they walked by. He said, "Hey, you're all looking beautiful. Why don't you come join us for a drink?" And of course, the young women completely ignored him and continued on their way. I, however, decided to call him out. As he was chuckling and laughing, I said, "That's not funny. Don't do that. You shouldn't say those things to people. If nothing else, it's just super creepy." Which ultimately resulted in him being pretty pissed off at me for the rest of the night, and we're not really friends. Example number 3. While dancing at a different club, because I really do love to dance, some guy approached me and a friend multiple times, to which we clearly and consistently replied, "No thanks, we don't want to dance with you." And then, "No, we don't want to dance with anyone." Then, no means no, stop approaching us. Then, leave us alone, don't touch me. Shortly thereafter, I watched him do the very same thing to another young woman who clearly said that no, she didn't want to dance with him, and no, she didn't want him touching her either. After watching him continue to return to her and press for more, I eventually lost all cool and gave no fucks. I started yelling in his face, and I told him, "Leave her alone, leave everyone else alone, no means no," and many other choice phrases. In response to my outburst, his friends turned to me, because it was loud. They were like, "Wow, his face is so big, but what's that noise?" And so his friends turned to me, and they just go, "Whoa, is it really that bad?" Sarcastically, like it was a funny thing, and to which I screamed in their faces, "Yes, it is that bad!" and many other things. So if those guys were better bystanders, it's more likely that this story could have ended with my first no thanks and I wouldn't have had to swear in front of all of you. So while that first scene of the harmless, super drunk guy involved me intervening on my own behalf, there were several other opportunities in all 3 stories for others to intervene, to stand up with me, and get my back, namely the bouncers, the people I was with, the friends of the people who were there. And the last 2 examples demonstrate my own attempts to be a bystander, which involved me identifying and recognizing and being aware of how one person's actions was making another person feel uncomfortable and negatively impacting them. So now, does this sort of hypervigilance sound like paranoia? Does it sound like a self-fulfilling prophecy where it could be met with, "Well, gee, if you're looking for trouble, you're gonna find it"? Well, paranoia involves suspicion and mistrust without evidence. But given the statistics and our own experiences, fear of sexual violence is not irrational. We've got a lot of evidence. Still, there is a distinct difference between these stories that I've just told and being paranoid while walking home alone in the dark when I don't see anyone or anything that seems suspicious. In the few stories that I just told, there are actual people around who are making me and others uncomfortable. Not only that, there are a lot of other people around who, if they were paying attention and read those situations differently, would have seen the really, really obvious signs, like behaviors and literal words, that scream, "I'm not comfortable, I'm not having it, I don't feel safe, I want out of this situation, I want you to stop, you're violating my personal space." And they could have intervened. Even better would have been if they had had the sort of preventative conversations with their harmless friends by already sitting them down and saying before they ever went out again, dude, it's actually not cool that you make people so uncomfortable. You need to stop doing that. So now, friends, some final clarifications. I am not saying that everyone is a perpetrator. And I'm not even saying that the preferred alternative is to be able to walk through everyday spaces without any eye contact or any interactions with anyone else whatsoever. At the core of the matter, I'm reiterating that very simple premise that everyone should be able to move through our everyday spaces without fear or threat of violence. In fact, if that were the quality that marked our everyday, I think it would create the opposite of alienation, the opposite of a lack of interaction and separation between people. I don't think it would lead to a cold distance between strangers and no contact with others whatsoever. Instead, if we were all able to move without fear or threat of violence, I would be able to tell you more stories about my friends and my relationships, our times together, and the wild nights out and about in Old Town Fort Collins, and not have to tell a rape story, or a story about yet another time when those experiences reflected a rape-supportive culture. If all of us work to change this culture through prevention and intervention, there might even become countless good stories, too many stories to remember as particular instances themselves. But my sense is that those stories would be about how we all had a really good time. We met new people, we had impromptu conversations, and we even danced like idiots in a big mixed group. There were no creepers, there were no confrontations, just really nice, fun people. The stories we could be telling are those when we had laughs, when we were able to connect as members of this community, and we simply relished being in the same space together.